That's right. I'm back here, Locked On Padres. We are kicking off our player review series for every major player from the 2024, what was thought to be at one point the dream season for the Padres, and we are starting things with Xander Bogaerts, the good, the bad, letter grade, what I thought about the man, perhaps the most polarizing Padre, and let me tell you, I have a lot of thoughts because there is a lot to talk about, and not all of it good. Actually, most of it not good. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Padres, your daily San Diego Padres podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, which is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day for Wednesday, October 23rd, 23 for Tatis, who is still here, by the way, as a bobblehead. That's why we're coming back on today, specifically. I definitely planned this, for sure. I am your host, as always, with sometimes occasionally, but certainly not always the most, Javier Reyes. You can follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiipeno, or at @Alone_Padres if you only want updates on the show. And also, be sure to check out my work over at Baseball, Just Baseball, I should say specifically. Good job, Javi. Where I write about the Padres and general baseball stuff. Going to be writing there especially a lot over the offseason as we kind of break things down. And you can also check out my other podcast, Baseball vs. the World, for very fun, silly topics over at Baseball vs. World on Twitter and Instagram and YouTube. Today's episode, guys, is brought to you also by FanDuel. You can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. And to get started with today's episode, guys, we're back. First of all, it's been a little bit, we've been vanished for a little bit of time now, but we're back, and we're going to be starting things off with what I think is usually the staple of postseason content, which is doing my player review series, where we talk about every major player for the Padres, the good, the bad, all sort of that stuff, and just kind of giving my letter grade because it's fun to revisit every single player individually, and I think it makes the most sense right now. And I think that it's going to be really fun doing it this year because I think the majority of Padres players, there's going to be a lot of good to say about all of them. It's actually going to be more fun, believe it or not, to find the bad in a lot of players this year. Like, what was the bad about Jackson Merrill? I do have a couple things that I'm going to criticize and whatnot, but I think this is going to be a lot of fun. Also worthy of noting that today, no more Pikachu. For all my video listeners, no more Pikachu on the thing. For now, we are using my guy Conquer the Squirrel from a game called Conquer's Bad Fur Day. I try to make outside Tatis, he's always going to be here, but whatever little figurine person, it kind of represents my mood about the Padres. And while this is a smiling squirrel on a throne, if you know anything about the video game Conquer's Bad Fur Day, believe me, it is a very, very sad ending of a game. So, that's where we're at right now, I think, with the Padres. But with Xander Bogaerts, let's not waste any time. I think that this is a player who, it's been really not great so far, the Xander Bogaerts experience. I think that it hasn't been as disastrous as, say, the Eric Hosmer situation, but I think that it's starting to become that same sort of tag where people bring up like, wow, imagine if they hadn't spent all this money on Xander Bogaerts. Wow, imagine if they didn't have this one albatross contract, you'd feel a lot better about their team, and that is sort of true here. But I think that heading into this season, there was still a lot of really major reasons for optimism regarding Xander Bogaerts, and I think that the biggest thing for Bogaerts was that we saw that last year he actually put up a decent, keyword decent season. All right, seriously, he produced 4.6 wins above replacement according to FanGraphs, which was tied for 22nd among all position players in Major League Baseball. Like, he actually was pretty good. And if you consider that last year, he's still the thing about the wins above replacement and his WRC plus, by the way, which was 119. The thing about those numbers is it doesn't necessarily to me mean that he had an amazing season, because the thing with Bogaerts was that he just did not produce enough runs. And what I mean by that is that he just didn't drive in any runs, right? Last year, the fact that he only had 58 RBIs in 155 games, genuinely one of the biggest choke jobs, right? We all know that about the 2023 Padres, but that wasn't exclusive to him. So you come into the season saying, you know what? We saw reasons for why Xander Bogaerts wasn't good last year. Before he got hit by a Spencer Strider fastball, in his wrist, which is a thing that has been plaguing him for a long time, but it really has been exacerbated and made worse as you've seen him play with the Padres. And you saw last year proof that that might have been the reason for why he was so disappointing last year. He was slashing 347 with a 422 on base and a 556 slugging percentage in 83 plate appearances before he took the Spencer Strider. I like mentioning Spencer Strider specifically because like that's one of the harder throwers, like ace pitchers in baseball when healthy, obviously. Hit him in the wrist, and then after that, the 83 appearances after that, he hit 183, 301, 310. That's a 611 OPS for those keeping track. So you literally saw that a decline in his numbers, that there was a reason for it, right? And it was because his wrist got smashed to smithereens. And you might be wondering, well, Javi, shouldn't we have been like, hey, this is a long-term issue with his wrist? Why were you expecting anything different this year? Because he showed us last year in the limited sample size that we did have, granted, you saw that while he did have that really rough stretch, do not get me wrong, he had a really rough stretch last year. You saw that last year, 153 WRC plus in March and April, right? Then May, 58 WRC plus, then June, 96 WRC plus, not great. Then in July, 115 WRC plus, he started to show the signs. And then a 79 in August, and then September, October, he had a 203 WRC plus. So in total, 106 in the first half, and then in the second half, 135. So you literally saw that after some time, Bogaerts was producing with the bat. So there was some reason to be like, you know what? I think he could be good here. And on top of that, you use some of the reasons that I used. The big reasons that I used were, hey, you know what? First year of a big contract, guys aren't always amazing. It happens sometimes. And on top of that, he was changing leagues, not just changing teams. He was also changing leagues. And sometimes I don't think that gets brought up. I understand the numbers. I get it. But to me, it is important to say, hey, he's playing the National League for once. He's hitting at Petco Park. He's not used to a lot of these pitchers. He's used to facing guys in the AL East from the Yankees, the Orioles, the Blue Jays, the Rays, and then even Detroit, teams like that. He's much more used to seeing those pitchers. Then he has to move over there. And there were other players who had done poorly in their first season, specifically shortstops. Carlos Correa, first season. He also has an injury problem. With the Twins, very, very bad. And then what happened? He was very, very good this year. He actually bounced back in basically every way that the Twins could have hoped for, if we're being honest. This past year, Carlos Correa, 155 WRC plus in only 86 games, so don't get me wrong, he got hurt. But then last year, he had 95 WRC plus and only 1.8 wins above replacement. This past year, 4.3. So he had an injury sort of thing that people worried about, had a bad year, bounced back immediately after. Francisco Lindor, his first year with the Twins, or I'm sorry, not with the Twins, with the Mets, was very, not bad, 3.9 wins above replacement, but a 101 WRC plus, it wasn't great, right? Was it a little bit unlucky? Sure, but that was his first year moving from the American League to the National League, totally different team, all that stuff, and wasn't great. And then immediately after, 124 WRC plus, 6.4 wins above replacement. After that, 5.5, and then after that, this year, 7.8, arguably the MVP of the National League among certain crowd of people, especially Puerto Rican people like myself, I guess. But you have him. And then you had Trey Turner. Trey Turner was another player who his first year in Philly, he was really disastrous, and unlike Xander Bogaerts, didn't have an injury to point to, right? And what did he do that first year with Philly? 108 WRC plus, this year 124. So he bounced back too. And you actually saw that with Trey Turner his first year, he had like a really good finish to his season. So there was all that combined, there was reason to believe that Xander Bogaerts would have a good season. Unfortunately though, that did not really happen, and it feels like Xander Bogaerts has become the new albatross for the Padres, and a player that I am deadly, deadly concerned about. And we're going to talk about everything that happened from this season, starting with the good, because frankly, there wasn't too much good. Talked about at the beginning of the show. I'm excited to go look at the bad from a lot of players, because I think that there's not too much bad with most players that we're going to talk about in this player review series this go around, which is awesome. I'm really excited to do that. But there's a lot of bad with Bogaerts, so we're going to be starting with the good, because there's not too much. And then I'm going to talk about my overall feelings on him, forecasting for the future, and then of course the letter grade, folks. So don't touch that dial, guys. But first, let me just take a second to talk to you about one of our longtime sponsors, and that is our friends over at FanDuel. Here's the thing, folks. If you're an NFL fan, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get in a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. And by the way, it's not just football. We're going to have some other sports going on. WNBA is over, but NHL just started up. And yesterday, the NBA season just kicked off. And for me, personally, if I'm betting, I like the Memphis Grizzlies for this year. Just a pro pick for your boy. I'm not going to go into it too much, but I think that team might make the finals. So that's just me, folks. That's just me. But remember, go check it out, guys. $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. And just like that, everybody, we are back thriving and vibing, sort of, into the second segment of the show. Let us begin with the good of Xander Bogaerts. And here's the thing. I talked about the season expectations. Again, I know what some of you are thinking. Javi, he wasn't that good last year. I don't care about the wins above replacement. Well, I do. I'm just saying that to provide context for why there was still hope that the bat and the overall fundamental skills were there. And I still think that we saw that in 2023. And in 2024, we were hoping, you know what? Like the rest of the Padres, and it came true, like the rest of the Padres team, they were abnormally bad in the clutch. Like abnormally bad. One of the 3 worst teams of the 21st century. And the other 2 teams that were worse than them in the clutch rating won 90 games. So the Padres were generationally bad with just doing the bare minimum and bringing guys home. So you thought, if this is what Bogaerts can do, he can play solid defense, he can give me a decent amount of home runs, he can rip doubles, he can get on base, provide some productive at-bats, and just be okay, that's great, especially for a guy who has a World Series resume. Heading into this year, I guess we figured out, or at least we figured, I should say, less double plays, just a little bit better luck and high leverage, and he should have a good season. And nonetheless, that isn't necessarily what happened, but there were some good things that happened this year, and I'd be remiss not to bring them up. The first thing, and that's the obvious thing, is his defense. And I think that it's only fair that if we're going to talk a lot about how Jackson Merrill, never playing center field in his life, basically, in his pro career, and he goes from not just being a shortstop, but to being one of the hardest outfield positions, right? Does that say something a little bit about shortstops and how the Padres approach things? I think it does. I think that it shows, and I think this is a trend around baseball, that just you draft shortstops and they're the best athletes. So if there's someone who could, if you need to, move to another position, it would be the shortstop most likely. But nonetheless, it's not an easy transition ever. And Xander Bogaerts did that. He played second base for the first time in his career. And by the way, not only did he change the position, he changed the position without knowing until like right before, when spring training was beginning, that he was going to play second base this year. And I think it was a fine decision, but that's a lot. On top of playing a position you haven't played before, I know it's different from going from infield to outfield. That's a little bit of a bigger leap, but it was right beforehand. He didn't get to practice. He made that comment before the season. And this year, he really produced. He had 6 outs above average, which was phenomenal at second base. In total, he had 5 outs above average because he did play a little bit shortstop, and that ranked in the 88th percentile of all Major League Baseball defenders. So he was a really solid player there. He played really good defense. He had really good range, and there were a couple moments where you're like, I believe he had a game towards I think it was the end of the season, if I'm not mistaken. Was it end of the season or was it the playoffs? I forgot which game it was, where he made 2 errors, I think, in like the same inning. I think it was the regular season. I think it was against one of the last teams they played, but whatever it was. Aside from that, Xander Bogaerts played good defense, and I think for the same reason we praise Merrill, Xander Bogaerts deserves some praise there. I really do believe that. And I think that overall, Xander Bogaerts as a defender, especially when you look at the whole totality of his career, that's never been a guarantee with him, right? This is actually a guy who, up until the Padres signed him, was really bad at shortstop, the position he always plays, right? In the in totality of his career, he has minus 32 outs above average at shortstop. Like, that's not great, you know what I mean? And then, of course, his last season before leaving, he had 5 outs above average, and then he had 3 last year, -1 this year, but that was too small of a sample size in my opinion. You get my point though. 6 outs above average over at second base this year. Really, really plus defender, and I think that was easily the thing that saved his value the most, for sure. And I think that he deserves a lot of credit for that, because it's not easy, especially with some of his injuries. That's actually what hurt him this year. Early on when they were playing against the Brewers, when he made a diving stop of the ball, just totally laid out, and he messed up his arm, and then he ended up missing time. And that was a big reason for why Bogaerts' season wasn't all that great, is that it started off with an injury. He only played 111 games this year, as opposed to 155 last year, and in general being a player that you can usually count on the availability for. But that was one of the good things, was his defense. The other good thing this year was he did start to pull the ball more. And I think that that's really important when it comes to tapping into a little bit more of his power, right? This year, his pull rate was really not, it wasn't amazing or anything like that. It didn't suggest that, oh my God, he's going to be like an incredible power hitter now. This is kind of like what Hassan Kim did, where he was able to pull more fly balls and tap into his power just a little bit more. He had a 41.7% pull rate this year compared to last year, which was 36.6%. Right. And I think you saw a lot of it dipped after the wrist injury. So at least you saw this year that he was still trying to tap into that power, pull the ball more to that left field, warehouse sign and whatnot in Petco Park. And even the year before that, when he was good, 37.2% pull rate. And then before that, 41.6. So it was actually one of the highest pull rates of his entire career. And I do think that that is a good thing. The other thing is his ground ball rate went down at least a little bit. The problem was that it saw a spike, his ground ball rate, which for my Eric Hosmer folks, you guys, I think know at this point why that's bad. His ground ball rate was actually a lot lower this year than it was last year in the first half before he got injured. And then it spiked up a little bit when he was coming back from injury. So it's at least worth noting the ground ball rate did go down a little bit. Pull rate was up. So those are some things that you can look at and point to and say, Bogaerts made some improvements there. And on top of that, the good defense. Other than that, though, maybe we could say was good in the playoffs, right? Like he had a decent stretch in the playoffs this season. I don't have the numbers actually right in front of me. Oh, I apologize. He was not good in the postseason. 564 OPS. I don't know where I got that from. Maybe just it was like one of the series he did okay there. Sorry, I dropped my phone on the keyboard. Like one of the series I think he did okay, but definitely, yeah. So that's it for the good. Let's just jump into it, guys. Let's start with the bad. So again, to wrap up, the good was pull rate increase, some nice developments with the ground ball rate going down, at least until he got hurt, and then of course the defense. In terms of the bad, we have a lot, and that's going to take us probably till the end of the show. I would argue that the first bad thing is everything else, literally everything else about Xander Bogaerts. I think that one of the things is, like I said last year, the Padres were horrible in high leverage situations. Xander Bogaerts had a 22 WRC plus in high leverage situations. That is not just bad, that's historically bad, that's offensively bad, and it doesn't make sense bad. For a player who always was actually pretty productive in high leverage situations for the Red Sox, when you actually pull up his numbers, he was about a 300 hitter with a decent on-base percentage, decent slugging. For him to be that bad made me think, oh, there's got to be some positive regression here. There's got to be. It only makes sense, right? And in 2024, that did not change. In high leverage situations, he was somehow worse this year, guys. Worse in high leverage situations with a 21 WRC plus. Yes, it's a 1-point difference, but that's just crazy. He struck out 25% of the time, and he did not draw a single walk, I believe, this year, which is just absolutely insane. I don't know how that happened, and again, I understand that he didn't necessarily have like a ton of at-bats in high leverage situations as opposed to last year. He only had 27 this year as opposed to 23 when he had 44, so about half as much, but he still didn't produce, and it was really, really frustrating. So yeah, I don't understand how that happens 2 years in a row. And especially when the rest of the team was a lot better. The Padres by far as a team were leading the league in WRC plus and high leverage situations by like 30 points. That's how good they were against the next best team. Bogaerts was still bad. Now, part of that is in general, his batting skills were bad this year. Like in general, Xander Bogaerts was not a very good hitter this year. And it was really frustrating to watch. Don't get me wrong. Like everybody understands this. This was not the type of player that you turned on the TV for and said, yes, Padres are back. He had a 95 WRC plus in total this year, slashing 264 with a 307 on base, 381 slash line. Just not great. Not great. So I will attribute part of his performance in high leverage to this wasn't being unlucky. This was just him being bad. But even still, the fact that he was not able to produce there once again, it's dumbfounding. And you could argue that if I use my same principle for why I believed in the Padres last year with their abilities in the clutch, that apply the same thing, and Bogaerts has to have some sort of positive regression. Like, guys, I cannot emphasize enough how low 22 is and 21 is. That means you're 89% worse than the average major league batter in high leverage situations this year. That doesn't make any sense for a player like Xander Bogaerts. For a player like Eric Hosmer, for a player like, I don't know, Matt Carpenter, when he was with the Padres for 1 year, okay. But a player like Xander Bogaerts, that should not be happening. But the fact that it didn't have a positive regression is very, very concerning. The next thing after that would be his weighted on base, a number that I love to use when just in a vacuum. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not always very telling. Nolan Arenado is a great example of this. His weighted on base is always a lot higher than is expected. And his expected is high that way because Nolan Arenado is really good at pulling balls. And that usually doesn't always do good for that stat because they don't believe that you're just always going to be able to pull the ball and tap into your power into whatever given side of the plate is. And it just doesn't seem like that's something you can do. But that's just something that Nolan Arenado is good at. And you saw this year that Xander Bogaerts' pulled ball stuff was better. He was pulling the ball at a better rate, which usually pretends for good power. But instead, this year, it's still concerning that his weighted on base, with all those things I said, with the high leverage, was 300, and his expected weighted on base was a paltry 306. You combine that with the fact that this is not the first year he's had this discrepancy. Last year, 343 weighted on base, 318 expected. Year before that, his best season with the Red Sox, 363 with a 323 expected weighted on base, right? So the fact that he is showing signs that this might not just be a luck related thing because of those two stats is beyond concerning, right? It's beyond concerning. And unlike last season, we can't really count on saying, and we can't find the sample size with that Spencer Strider situation where, oh, I see, he got hurt on the wrist again, and that's why his numbers went down. This year, that wasn't really the case. He just wasn't able to do that. They actually had given him a knob and like a little bit, they did do some things, like he used a new bat that was easier on the wrist, didn't amount to much. And it doesn't have me really concerned for the future going forward. And we're going to talk a little bit more about the future and about some of the other bad things for Xander Bogaerts this year in just 1 second. But first, we must discuss a legendary application, folks. And that is our good friends over at PrizePicks, ladies and gentlemen, the #1 daily fantasy sports app on the market with over 10 million members. All you have to do is pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. I'm hunting wabbits. You can now win up to 100 times your money, guys, and it's the best way to get on the action and available in over 30 states, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks also offers weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like for Taco Tuesday, which just passed, but even still, each Tuesday, PrizePicks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONMLB to get that aforementioned deal, $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Remember it one more time, guys. LOCKEDONMLB after you download the PrizePicks app. PrizePicks, run your game. And just like that, everybody, we are back thriving and vibing here on the Locked On Padres podcast. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Javipeno, Javiipeno, for more Padres tweets and just a bunch of shenanigans, ladies and gentlemen. Let's continue talking about some of the bad and give my letter grade for Xander Bogaerts. One thing that I think has been interesting is how timid Xander Bogaerts looks at the plate. And he's not very aggressive. And I think that pitchers started to note that. First pitch strike percentage was up 6% this year from last season in 2023. They went after him, and he had moments where he wasn't really swinging as aggressively on pitches that were just automatic strikes. Now, don't get me wrong. I had a rant this year about, was it Manny Machado when he grounded into a double play on the first pitch? I understand that. But for the majority, it's not always bad to swing on the first pitch as long as it's in the zone and you're not just giving pitchers a free strike, right? Like, that's not good to be known as a batter who's always going to watch that first pitch go in there no matter where it is and then just take the strike because then you're down in the hole. And Xander Bogaerts did, swing a little bit more this year. 3.7% up in his first pitch swing percentage. But the fact that it didn't relate and it didn't amount to a lot more contact on those first pitches was another concerning thing and another thing to add into the bad column. Furthermore, the biggest things, I think, for Xander Bogaerts this year, aside from all the weighted on base, all of those numbers that I was talking about before, his walk rate also went down this year. And his walk rate has been something that he's always... Basically, aside from his 2015 season, which was one of his first seasons in the league, it's always been a calling card for him, right? 8.1%, 8%, 9.5%. His lifetime total career walk rate is an 8.4%. And this year, it was 6%. So he wasn't walking at all. And that was the one thing that we had last year. again, what I was mentioning before is the WRC plus, the wins above replacement. He was still able to. He wasn't swinging at bad pitches, and he was drawing some walks. The problem with him is that he got a hit when it actually mattered. Right, that was the big problem with him. This year, not only did he not get hits, as we attested to with the high leverage situations, but he also wasn't drawing any walks. He had a 307% walk rate this year. The batting average was fine, I guess. And there's actually some numbers that suggest maybe it should have been a little bit higher. But overall, that's not good for your walk rate to go down. And then even his strikeout rate went up a little bit from 16.5% last year to 17.1% this year. Now, that's not a huge concern. In fact, I would not mind if his strikeout rate went up and he produced more power, or if he was pulling the ball more consistently, or if he was just getting, you know what I mean? Like, I don't mind strikeouts, and I don't think you should mind strikeouts necessarily, as long as they are amounting to something, as long as they are worth it. A strikeout rate being high isn't always a definitive bad, right? But I think the decrease of a walk rate and an increase of a strikeout rate, both of those combined, is not a good sign, right, for Xander Bogaerts. And then, dare I say, probably the most damning thing. All right, so we've got down and weighted on base. We've got down and expected weighted on base. We're down in the walk rate. We're up in the strikeout rate. All that stuff. The hard hit rate stuff is horrifying, ladies and gentlemen. Ever since 2021, when he had a 43% hard hit rate, it was 39.5 the year after that. His best year probably amounts to why there was a big discrepancy in his WOBA and his expected, by the way, the last season in Boston. He had a 39.5% hard hit rate, so it was down by nearly 4%. Then the year after that, it was down nearly 5% in 2023 with the Padres. Now, what did we do? We said, hey, the wrist thing, that might be part of this. This year, not such a thing. It goes down again. Now, did it go down again by a drastic amount? No, but it still went down again, all the way down. If you consider that from 2021, his hard hit rate has declined since 2021 every year steadily, 33.2% this year. So he's striking out more, walking less, not hitting in high leverage. And oh, by the way, his hard hit rate is down, and it keeps going down. If the hard hit rate was up, guys, I would be celebrating and telling you guys to say, you know what, we have hope. But right now, the biggest hope for Xander Bogaerts is quite simply this. We're just hoping that, he's Xander Bogaerts, he'll figure it out. That's literally where we are at right now with Xander, and I don't know how you fix this situation. I am terrified of this man for all those reasons I mentioned, and that's the thing is, last year we said the wrist. We said we saw him produce. We saw the second half WRC plus. We saw how he was in September, October, and all these things, which showed the batting skills were still there. And you spend a whole offseason, and then you're worse, and the wrist isn't even necessarily a problem again, and the hard hit rate is down again. I understand he did have that midseason injury, but even before that, let's remember that to start this season out of the gate, before the injury even happened, then he missed a bunch of time, it's not like Xander Bogaerts was showing us something again. He was once again really bad. In fact, he hit 217 in March and April. To start this season, after all that stuff, 67 WRC plus in March and April, and then a 64 in May. And then he misses some time, comes back in July, 205 WRC plus, but it didn't matter because then in August it was an 84. This year, first half WRC plus of 71, second half of 115. So I'm not saying he can't be good, but I just don't think that when you look at what we needed to do, the improvements we needed to see this year, when I defended this guy vociferously heading into the season, saying, I don't understand why we're all out on Xander Bogaerts, but everybody's in on Trey Turner, who only had one good month, right, last year, as opposed to Bogaerts, who had an entire second half that was good, and his first half that was bad. We can point to the wrist being a big part of it. We literally have numbers on that, as I've repeated ad nauseum on today's episode. But heading into this year, man, and after the season, I'm concerned. I'm really deadly concerned. Don't get me wrong. This is not the only contract in baseball that's bad, but it's not impossible. 11 years, 280 for Xander Bogaerts. He's still got, how many more years is this? He's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. He's got 8 seasons left. Is that what it is? No. Hold on. I can't do math properly. Give me 1 second. So he's got 9 years left of this deal. It's up in 2033. That's the last season. And he's getting paid $25 million a year. Thankfully, it doesn't escalate. At least you can hope on that regard. Man, this is bad, guys. And I want to start off the player review series this way because I do want to kind of be positive because there's not too many issues I have with a lot of players in the Padres this year. But this was a disaster of a season. in my opinion, because we just didn't see anything. And with age, with you getting older, and with you having this injury that, frankly, AJ Preller, it's like malpractice for you to overpay and give more years based on reports. They say that no one was offering him more than 7. For you to offer him 11. Now, granted, maybe you had to do that in order to get him in the first place. I imagine that's why. But even still, 11 years for a guy who has this wrist issue and has shown that his hard hit rate, that his weighted on base, and all these things is going down. A player that hasn't always been a consistent beast on the defensive side of things. That makes you wonder, like, was this a panic signing? Were you saying, oh no, Trey Turner declined us. Oh no, Aaron Judge declined us. I just got to get a name. I got to get a player out there. And now we're in a situation where, you know, you just have to hope that because he's Xander Bogaerts, things can get better. And frankly, as someone who's been watching football and seeing Jets fans, not all of them, but then see people say, it's Aaron Rodgers, he'll figure it out. And then they're 2-5. Going by just the name value and past precedent in sports, it's not a bad idea, but it can be fraught. Right. And I think that if you use that as your only reasoning for why you think Xander Bogaerts is going to get better, or a given player in any sport, I think that is incredibly flawed thinking, which is why I can't just go out here and say, well, he's Xander Bogaerts, he's got to be better than this. I don't know, guys, because I was defending him heading into this year, and the only thing I really saw was some slight improvements in the pull rate and some slight improvements with being a little bit more aggressive and all that sort of stuff we talked about in the first segment. And this year, all I saw was down in basically every category that matters. I imagine that there's some other deep dives out there that might show something better, but for me, I'm giving Xander Bogaerts a season a D+, because yes, I understand he wasn't awful, and I understand that he was hurt for a lot of this. You could argue maybe a C- for his season. Maybe you could argue that because he did play good defense. But given the contract, and given that these are the years where you're supposed to be able to produce, this is something that we're expecting when he's like 36. Right? If he was 36, I'm like, I mean, it's kind of what we were expecting. Our window's now, right? But for him to already be showing these declines, getting hurt, it's not going to make things better. And he's just not showing any signs, right? Are you kidding me? You didn't draw a single walk this year in 27 plate appearances, high leverage situations? What's going on? You didn't even have a good postseason. So, folks, I am deadly scared of Xander Bogaerts. That's why I'm giving it such a harsh letter grade, because of the contract, because of the situation that the Padres are in. I understand that they might have some money to spend. It's not over, right? There are some teams that they spend a lot of money on a player and then they're just done. You see what happened with the Nationals. You see what happens with the Angels. You see what happens with some of those teams. I'm not saying it's over, because it is still, just 2 years into the contract. But, oh boy, just based on reviewing this year, it's a D+, man. I'm sorry, but that's where we're at. And Xander Bogaerts, I hope it gets better, because I have nothing against him. Unlike Eric Hosmer, where I have a lot of other reasons other than just on-field play and numbers for why Eric Hosmer was the bane of my existence, Xander Bogaerts, I'm still really rooting for him. I really am. But I need to see more. I do. I need to see more. Maybe he needs some sort of surgery, but I feel like they would have tried that. We got a report on that already. I don't know, man. It's very scary. But with that all being said, that about does it for today's edition of the Locked On Padres podcast, the only pod that may be better than the Padres themselves, and the first ever edition, not first ever, the first player review of the 2024 off season. Hopefully you like this. We're going to be doing more of these. But in terms of the future of this show, tomorrow, going to be doing a crossover with Millard Thomas, talking about the playoffs, talking about a whole bunch of things. Host of Locked On D-backs, that should be fun. And then Friday, in honor of the World Series, I'm going to talk about Juan Soto and whether or not did the Padres lose that trade, because that's been going around a lot lately. I've got a lot of opinions on that, a lot of complicated opinions on that. For one thing, though, can y'all stop placing the Moneyball music over every game-winning hit? You guys are completely missing the point of that movie. And frankly, overusing that stuff is annoying. Like, watch another movie, please. Please? There are better examples out there. Use something from, I don't know, Major League. I don't know. But Moneyball, it's like, no, guys, stop. Media literacy, I beg you, people, get some. But anyway, until next time, guys, when we talk about all those things, stay safe and, of course, stay faithful. My fire faithful homies, take care.